Hi, I'm Lenny Pinna. I'm the publishing editor of this book, A Face From Uranus, Correspondence between Tedd Burr and Henry Bellaman, 1943 to 1945. This is the 19-year-old Tedd Burr on the cover of the book. This photo was taken in 1943 in Bellevue, Ohio, which at the time was a town of about 7,000. He got this photo taken with his own earnings from a paper route because he wanted to be remembered looking like this just in case he got drafted into military service. And he thought if anything happened to him, he wanted to be remembered this way and not like the photo in his high school yearbook where he had to conform by wearing a suit jacket and tie. Can you imagine a 19-year-old in 1943 walking down the street looking like this, wearing makeup, and walking into a photographer's studio asserting, this is how I want to be photographed. This is how I want to look. I feel that that makes this strikingly beautiful photograph all the more extraordinary. At the same time, we have Henry Bellamann, who was living at the Ansonia Hotel in New York City, famous novelist who had just had the best-selling novel King's Row. King's Row was a psychological study of a small Midwestern town during the horse and buggy era, and it was kind of considered controversial because he disclosed the underlying secrets of what we call polite society. There was incest, murder, adultery, insanity, homosexuality, and a sadistic doctor, Dr. Gordon, who performed unnecessary surgeries on townsfolk that he deemed were deserving because of their disreputable behavior. So they would go to the doctor for one thing and it'd end up being disfigured or paralyzed. Well, Warner Brothers made a film about King's Row, and it starred a young Ronald Reagan in the role of Drake McHugh. And it actually was the role that catapulted Ronald Reagan to fame. Now, you're probably wondering, what could have possibly brought these two different individuals together from these two completely different worlds? Well, it started with Tedd Burr. Among all of Tedd's artistic interests in music and theater and literature, he loved the movies. He worked as an usher at this little state theater in Bellevue, Ohio, for free. The owner wanted to give him some money, but he thought, no, I'm being compensated enough by being able to watch the movies as many times as I want. So when King's Row came to town, he got to see it multiple times, and he was so enamored with it that he went to the library to get the novel. And within a few pages, he discovers a character, Jamie Wakefield, who was described as too pretty to be a boy. Jamie Wakefield was not in the film version, and that's because it was 1943, and the Hays Code, which was the censoring body at the time, would not let an effeminate or homosexual character be portrayed in a film. You might wonder, how did I know about this story, and how did I end up with the letters? Well, it all started back in the 1990s when I was living in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was teaching acting and directing at Kent State University. I was also very active in the Cleveland theater. The elder Tedd Burr, who was now in his late 60s, had been an actor in Cleveland for years and was basically considered a legend in the town. Well, he and I were both cast in the production of we were cast in DeBama Theater's production of Terrence McNally's A Perfect Ganesh. And, we hit it off during rehearsals and became friends, and then we continued to be friends throughout his life. I would often visit Tedd at his home, and we would talk about art and literature and music and opera. Well, when it came to opera, he did most of the talking. I just did most of the listening. I had also cast Tedd in a couple of my theater productions. I had started a new theater called Ecclesia Theater, and I started with the pinnacle of Western drama, Oedipus Rex. And I cast Tedd as Tiresias, and I had him up in the balcony, this old, blind, wise sage, hovering over the audience and looking down and predicting Oedipus's downfall. He was wonderful. And then I also directed him in an outdoor production of Shakespeare's As You Like It. I'd cast him as the old sage Adam, and also as the deity Hymen. He came in all his glory. During our visits, Ted never talked about his private life or the past. We just talked about the arts, except for one night in February 2000. He had given me a play to read, The Ladies of the Camellias by Lillian Grogue. And I think he was hoping that I would direct or produce it, and that I assumed that he wanted to act in it. So I read the play, and I made an appointment with him to visit him at his home. And I told him I liked the play, and that I would probably cast him as Benoit, the stage manager character, who was described as somewhere between the ages of 70 and 100. And we both laughed. And then he informed me that he wanted to play one of the two female leads, who happened to be the famous period actresses Sarah Bernhardt or Eleonora Duse. Well, that led to a discussion about men playing women's roles and the period acting styles, which then led to a discussion about gender, which then uncharacteristically led Ted to begin opening up about his early life and his struggle with gender identity confusion. I happened to capture that evening on digital video and ended up making the film Letters to Uranus, The Hidden Life of Tedd Burr. Here's a scene I'm going to show you that pinpoints the exact moment I learned about the young Tedd Burr and his association with Henry Bellamann.
You know, I want to tell you this. You do also have wonderful eyes for the theater. I think of you as having kind of Betty Davis eyes. Big, and you're so lucky to have not squinty little eyes, but these great orbs that can tell so much, can show so much, express so much.
Thanks. Well, I do. I consider myself lucky because I do think the eyes are the window to the soul. But, you know, for me, I mean, I always felt I had a beautiful soul, and in terms of acting, didn't have the package, you know, the leading man package, you know, and it was the two roles, you know, what defines my life, the Elephant Man, when I did Elephant Man, and Making Faces, when I played a woman.
Yeah.
Because when I was Elephant Man, it allowed me to feel that beautiful inside that no one could see, and then with Making Faces, again, like, the woman, you know, I got so much attention for being an attractive woman, and that I don't get when I'm on stage as a man, or I don't feel that way, you know?
Yeah. Do I ever know? I too spent my life, my young life certainly, feeling very unwanted, very at odds with the world that I was living in, not knowing who I was, that nobody wanted me or cared for me because I felt I was neither fish or fowl, sort of lost in between. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Would you like to see something? I'm a little sensitive about it, but what I just talked about, you have to come downstairs and keep some of this stuff downstairs out of the range of most people seeing it. And I will be going down the steps very slowly because of having once falling down the steps and breaking my ankle and taking so long.
Take your time.
And I had to have surgery and a metal plate put in and now I live for fear of falling, having broken both legs. I don't think you've seen this room since I redid it. I had a plumbing problem, and when the plumbers were here, it made me realize how ashamed and neglected this room was. So I went to work and really kind of fixed it up. I'm really
great.
Really pleased with those. All my opera tapes
Oh my
and
God.
opera singers that I wrote letters to that sent me pictures that I've held on to the years and
I don't know where you find the time.
love. And I record all of this stuff thinking that I would have, in my twilight years, playing all of these singers that are long gone, and I never get around to it. It's terrible. But, you ready?
Yeah.
I told you that I felt not belonging to society. This is what I looked like when I was 18.
You're, Ted. Oh my gosh. You were so beautiful.
Well, I
Oh
don't.
my, you were like a cherub. I mean, like innocent boy, and yet I see that sort of Katharine Hepburn, young Katharine Hepburn or something. Oh my God.
Yeah,
So
well,
androgynous.
upstairs I mentioned Kings Row and Henry Bellamann.
Yeah.
Well, this is Henry Bellamann that I wrote to and that he wrote back. And in one of his letters, I sent him this picture and the picture that was taken for the high school annual graduation. And he said, about this picture, you have a face from the planet Uranus.
Here. He said Uranus?
He said Uranus, yes, as I recall.
Uranus.
Uh-huh.
Ted.
What?
Do you think that Dr. Bellaman was like a latent or repressed homosexual?
Well, I don't know, but no, I really don't know. I don't think so, no.
I had read this gay astrology book, and the planet Uranus is really significant in gay astrology. I mean, I just find it very curious that he used that word, you were from the planet Uranus, Very interesting.
Well, I'll tell you this, he really preferred my little high school picture, which is upstairs and which I can show you, a very, very innocent little boy. That this, I think he felt was very dangerous.
Well, you know what, Ted? If
what?
you went to, had you gone to New York looking like that, they would have eaten you up. I mean, it wouldn't have been like here where you felt like you were unwanted. I mean, that person would have just been eaten up in New York.
Well, I never got to New York. Dr. Bellaman at one point was thinking of having me come to New York to be his secretary, which was very frightening, and I protested a great deal. By the way, this is a sample of his letter. Look at that handwriting.
I can't. Oh my God.
It's very, very difficult. Of course, when I was getting these letters, I had learned to make them out. And a few months ago, I thought, well, I transcribed his letters. You see, when he died, his wife, Catherine Bellaman, sent me all of my letters which he had saved. So I have a complete correspondence between the two of us that lasted a few years as I was going through this stage of development until his death.
He saved your letters?
Yes, he saved all my letters.
Huh.
So I have this correspondence. By the way, look what time and life does to you. This is a recent photograph of myself. You wouldn't even recognize myself. But I don't know what you just said. Dr. Bellaman lived in Vienna at the time of Freud, and he was one of the founders of the Babcock Society, which introduced the study of psychiatry to this country. And I know that in his letters to me, he states, Ted, I am not a psychiatrist. All you need is a little understanding. Well,
So, wait a minute. So he was sort of helpful in some way? I mean, this,
Helpful?
yeah.
He saved my life. I really think he saved my life.
Ted?
I used to wait for those letters, and I took from them, and I really think little by little I learned to live in a world that I had not been able to exist in before.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, this is my favorite actress, Catherine Cornell, in the role of Masha in The Three Sisters. So we go upstairs.
Now you know where the title of the book comes from. Well, we entered Letters to Uranus in a couple of festivals, and it was picked for the 2001 Cleveland International Film Festival and the 2002 New York Independent Film and Video Festival. And I have a couple of stories about each of those. The first one was at the Cleveland Film Festival. At the Q&A, this man got up and he says, "You know what you have here? This is the prelude or the prequel to the larger film, which is about the story contained in those letters." I thought, wow, how intriguing. I had no idea because I hadn't read the letters. Then the other story I have is kind of humorous. Because of New York, we had to buy posters and get promotional materials. And so I had this poster made up that I would put on telephone poles and bulletin boards. And so I went down to the Gay and Lesbian Center, and they had a bulletin board that had hundreds, if not 1,000 posters, flyers, business cards on it. And I got a thumbtack and put the poster on it. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with the British comedy show Absolutely Fabulous, or AbFab as they call it, but I had a friend in Cleveland, woman friend. We used to watch it faithfully, but I had moved to New York. I'd moved to California, and she called me and she said, "I just saw your poster with Ted's face on an episode of Absolutely Fabulous." I was like, "What?" She led me to see, season 4, episode 7, which was called Gay. And the reason is Eddie, Edina, and Patsy, Pats, go from Britain to New York to try to find Eddie's estranged gay son. And they go to the Gay and Lesbian Center, and they're inquiring about him. And they end up meeting a therapist who was played by Whoopi Goldberg. And she tells them, "I can't give you any personal information, even if he is a client here, because we can't give out that information." So they concoct a little plan, and Eddie gets Whoopi Goldberg out for lunch, and Pats goes into her office and begins to start rifling through the file cabinet to find her son. And right next to her big blonde beehive is Ted's photo on this poster. I was so touched because I thought that was a deliberate choice by the set designer. And that's when I knew that Ted had an iconic look in this portrait that captured somebody else. So while we were still showing in film festivals and applying for others, Ted was transcribing all of the letters because now I wanted to read them. And so he handed me this binder with all of the letters transcribed so that I could read from the first letter to the last. I thought, this is a story that must be told. That man at the Q&A was absolutely right. But it was also the year 2000, and I knew that America was not ready yet for this story. Ted and Henry were talking about things in 1943 that we're only beginning to talk about in the last 5 to 10 years. So now I'd like to introduce you to the actual letters. But I want to let you know that before I read Ted and Henry's letters, I feel like you should get involved with Ted's psyche right before he wrote, because I told you that he was reading King's Row. So I'm going to start with reading a couple excerpts from King's Row before reading some of Ted and Henry's letters. This first selection is something that Ted actually read himself toward the end of our film, because he was questioning himself in later years, like, why did I write to this famous author? And he tells us in the film that right in the early pages, he saw a character he identified with. And this is this passage that he read in the film. This is about the teacher, Sally Venable. She stirred in her chair and sniffed audibly. The windows were open, those tall, narrow church windows, but they afforded poor ventilation. The room smelled abominably. Sweaty bodies, most of them infrequently washed. Winter clothes that had seen a hard season. The harsh odor of small boys verging on adolescence. She closed her eyes for an instant and thought of the hour of dismissal still 30 minutes away. When she glanced up again, she saw Jamie Wakefield looking at her. Almost she could believe he wore a look of concern or sympathy even. She nodded at him, and the boy flashed back his quick, brilliant smile. He's pretty, that boy, she thought. Too pretty for a boy. But all the Wakefields are good looking. Jamie's attention had returned to the reading, and Sally Venable watched the play of expression on his mobile features. He was affecting now a sort of disdain, a precocious expression for a boy of 12, that pursed his full red lips and narrowed his wide, overbright eyes. His hair, soft and black, swept back picturesquely from his wide, blue-veined forehead with its exquisitely traced brows. I wish they'd dressed him differently. That ruffled collar now, that very ruffled collar spread out over his blue jacket did get Jamie into trouble sometimes. Boys called him Sissy. But he never resented it, and usually this proved a good defense. He was interested now in spite of himself. He had forgotten that Miss Venable was looking at him, and his lips parted in a half smile, an enchanting smile. He looks like a girl in love, his teacher thought. He's as beautiful as Cassandra Tower. This next excerpt is later in the novel when Jamie Wakefield is now in his 20s. And it's a scene between he and Drake McHugh, played by Ronald Reagan in the film. Of course, this scene was not in the film. And it's a horse and buggy scene where Drake was known for driving all the girls that he liked around town in his horse and carriage, and this is where he became a person of disrepute in Dr. Gordon's eyes. And so one day, though, he gave Jamie a ride, and he was talking to Jamie in this horse and carriage. So I'm going to read a couple of little excerpts from that. They were silent for a while. Jamie looked almost hungrily at everything they passed. The most ordinary bush or tree seemed to engage his liveliest attention. Looks like everybody gets to do what they want except me. Drake gave him a careless thump. Don't feel sorry for yourself, Jinx. I tried plenty of that. Don't do you any good. I know, but Paris goes off to Europe and little old Vera Lashinsky goes to Berlin and everybody does something they like. I don't believe many people do. I think you're wrong there. Well, anyhow, they're not kept from doing some things that they're just dying to do. That might be. It's terrible, and I'd just as soon be dead. Yes, I have, honest, Drake, and I'm so lonesome. Drake glanced quickly at Jamie's brooding face. He looked sulky and sullen. There were bluish shadows under his eyes. He did look dead tired, sure enough. Why, Jinx? Why what? You said you were lonesome. Why? I haven't got any friends. Why? Drake was peculiarly persistent. I don't know. Drake did not question further. Once more he gave Jamie a quick, keen, scrutinizing glance. Jamie was much as he had always been. He looked no more than 16, Drake decided. His face was as soft of contour and as warm and lovely in coloring as ever. He was incredibly good-looking. Drake thought he looked a good deal like Poppy Ross. Jamie had the same yielding look, the same sensuous roundness, the same silky-looking mouth. Drake slapped the horse with the reins and half whistled under his breath. He would not have liked for anyone to know just what he was thinking at that moment or how Jamie actually made him feel. A little later in this long carriage ride, Drake picks up the conversation again. See, Jinx, why don't you be interested in the same things that other fellows are? Just a little, anyhow. I just can't, and I can't pretend either. Well enough so you'd have some kind of company. I guess I'd rather be all by myself than try that. How about girls? Got a girl? A look near to bewilderment came into Jamie's troubled eyes, also an oddly withdrawn expression as if he shrank from something acutely disagreeable. No, Drake, I don't get along with girls a bit. Gee, why? I thought they always wanted to talk about poetry and music and stuff like that. They're the most unpoetic things on earth. Jamie gave the words a syllable by syllable emphasis. Drake laughed. Got no use for their brains, have you, Jinx? They haven't got any brains, Drake. Oh, get out. Honest. Well, you don't have to like them for their brains. They got other things. What? Drake was so astonished by Jamie's utterly innocent look that he gasped. Then he clapped himself on the knee and laughed. Jamie's face colored darkly, but he did not laugh. Oh, that. He spoke with an intense contempt and disgust. Say, Jinx, it won't do to talk like that. I hate girls. Why? I don't know. I just can't stand them. You mean you don't even like to look at? Not especially. Hell, kid, they're the prettiest things on God's green earth. I can't stand them, I tell you. I don't see why. God almighty, Jinx, you look like a girl yourself. You ought not to hate them. Oh, Drake, please don't say that. Oh, look here, Jamie. I haven't said anything to hurt you. I'm just saying you're the handsomest, best-looking boy I ever saw. Jamie did not answer. So I think you can understand what the young 19 Tedd Burr, looking like this, was feeling like when he was reading those passages in King's Row. And so this is his first letter to Henry Bellaman. September 20th, 1943. Dear Mr. Bellaman, hardly do I know what I am about to write, or that I should write you. Perhaps I feel some inner force compelling me to do this. Any consequence must be an adventure of the future. I hope you shall read me out here, and in what I hope may follow. Before you cast me herein away, let me tell you that I am writing on the strength of Jamie Wakefield. I feel utterly self-conscious and am exhausting myself in attempts to be and write just the proper thing in this letter. Perhaps I shall be able to forget that and have a real chat with you. You seem so real. Last night I read a scene between Drake McHugh and Jamie Wakefield. I fell into an utter storm, for it was not of Jamie I read, but of myself. I believe to have such an understanding of Jamie, you might be able to extend to me something. I don't know quite what. Oh, Mr. Bellaman, my eyes sting so I can hardly see to write. I beg of you, in the name of Jamie Wakefield, if you believe you could give me courage, advice, or just a listening eye, I would like to tell you my story. If you can picture Jamie waiting for a coming day, Saturday, September 25th, which would decide his possible army induction, then know the sudden confusion within me. In the event that this may mean anything to you, please send me an address where I might write you personally. A story of a Jamie. Sincerely, Tedd Burr. And this is Henry's very quick reply. September 22nd, 1943. My dear Tedd Burr, I was much touched by your letter. Jamie is one of my favorite people because he is one of the most misunderstood. By all means, write me. But if you're going to tell me your story, tell me the whole story without reservations, just plain so. I must tell you that I am not a psychiatrist, but you don't need one. You probably just need understanding. I am happy that you felt you could write to me. You may be sure I respect the motive as I respect the confidence. Sincerely, Henry Bellaman. Ted follows up with a very long letter to tell him his life story up to that point. I'm only going to read a few paragraphs from the very beginning for two reasons. One is to really demonstrate the beauty of Ted's writing, and the other where he really tells Henry right away what the main problem in his life is. September 27th, 1943. Dear Mr. Bellaman, buried in the fertile loam soils of Ohio is Bellevue. It's a town of several thousands. Its streets are lined with flowing maples. The sun sends dusty shoots of light through the abundant leaves to the weedy gardens neatly placed at the side of each house. It is quiet and warm everywhere. On a Sunday afternoon, one either naps or trudges to a solitary theater for a matinee, after which there is the lure of a dingy ice cream parlor. All end in the walk home as cool darkness is scented with odors of frying food. Hidden in this massive world is Bellevue, and hidden in Bellevue is Tedd Burr. These were my thoughts after I had read your letter. I had hardly dared to expect an answer, yet here it was, kind and inviting. A part of you had found a way to me, insignificant me. How proud I am and grateful. I'm trying to say, Mr. Bellaman, that in writing to me, you have brought me happiness, consequently, a zest for the future, and I shall tell you my story, the whole story. I have some regret that it isn't a pretty story, but King's Row has instilled within me such an admiration and faith in you that I shall not hesitate in throwing open my very soul. There is so much to tell. I was born in Bellevue, July 26, 1924, so I am 19. My mother in tears once told me, before your birth, I had prayed my child would be a daughter. I had wanted a girl so much. I was disappointed in bearing a son. It was wrong of me to make up my mind so. I should be thankful I had 4 sons and only 1 daughter. Girls have such a hard life. Always pain and suffering. A boy can be so independent. In my heart lay an answer. Could it be that any woman could suffer in being a woman, as I have suffered in not being one? So I think you can detect just from these first few letters that there's a dramatic story about to unfold. I wanted to tell the story, but I also knew, again, I told you that it would take a long time before I thought America would be ready. But I wanted to start working on it. So I asked Ted, could I work on a film? And he gave me permission, and I started working on scenes and outlines and showed them to Ted. But then in 2003, I moved to California, and he had had a health scare. And so he wrote to me and he said, I want to bequeath the letters to you and give you permission to make your film, because just in case anything happens to me. And that's what happened. I visited him. He handed me 3 big blue envelopes marked 1943, 1944, 1945, and he had all of their letters in chronological order. So I did continue to work on a film script, and but I knew I had time. But then in 2006, when Brokeback Mountain came out, I thought, now maybe our culture is beginning to shift. Maybe there's going to be a time in the future I'm going to be able to actually tell Ted and Henry's story. In 2012, when Ted passed away, I knew I really had to now buckle down and really get serious about telling this story. But at that same time, I also realized that I needed to do more research on Henry Bellaman in order to tell a really complete story. Fortunately, I found Professor Harry Bain in South Carolina, who had done his dissertation on the life and work of Henry Bellaman, and all of the information he gave me just blew open the doors of my imagination so that I could tell a fuller, more imaginative, complete story. I owe Professor Bain an immense amount of thanks. So then I worked on the film, but I I couldn't condense it. I end up with a 240-page script, which basically is about 4 hours of film. No one's going to want to produce that. And then it was about 2016 when I saw Netflix The Crown that I thought, aha, that's the format I think will be the best way to tell this story. So I developed a 6-part limited TV series, but about 6 one-hour episodes called In the Name of Jamie Wakefield. And so I started sending that script out to script reading agencies and TV pilot contests. And although they gave me feedback about my structure or the sequence of scenes, they were all unanimous with saying, keep going with this. You've got the story, you've got the characters, you've got the world of the drama that you've created for this, and you've got timing on your side. This story is now going to be immediate for now. That gave me a lot of encouragement, and I continue to hone the pilot, which is needed to send out to agencies. And in January 2020, the pilot became a finalist in a TV pilot contest. It didn't win, but it was a finalist. And then the pandemic happened. But right before the pandemic, I talked to a woman in Los Angeles, and she said, if I were you, I would publish those original letters first, because one, you want to keep the rights to the material, and second, producers are going to be more interested in the material if it's considered intellectual property. So that's what happened during the pandemic. I ended up working on the book, and now that the book is out, I think, well, I still have the long-range goal of telling the story on screen in the TV series pilot. So there's been a past, there's been a present, and hopefully there's going to be a future. So now, I'd like to give you a little preview from the TV series. I've been working on a performance piece from episode 3, and this is where Henry and Ted first meet in imaginative dreamscape. And I call the setting the Great Hall of Arts and Humanities, and it has large columns and long burgundy drapes, and there's a large upholstered chair, there's a chaise lounge, there are 2 grand pianos. You know, in Henry's apartment at the Ansonia Hotel, they had 2 grand pianos in the apartment. So there's a lot of artwork around, books, sculptures. So the thing you need to know is this is about 3 or 4 months into their correspondence. And so Ted had already written a novel by the age of 19. This is even before he wrote to Henry. So you need to know that, because Henry says that he would take a look at the script. He also asked Ted to send him a photograph. The thing you can know about Henry is that although he's been known as a writer, his early career was he was an exceptional pianist. He taught piano and music. He actually became the dean of music at Curtis Institute in Philadelphia. He was also on the governing board of Juilliard music department. So this man was quite an accomplished man before he even got known for his writing. And it figures into this scene. The other things to know is it takes place at night. Both of them are writing to each other, so that they dissolve into this great hall of arts. Henry comes in from stage right, Ted from stage left. They're both in their nighttime, Ted in his silk pajamas, Henry in his pajamas with a short robe. And I think that's enough to tell you. The scene will speak for itself. I am one of dreams and moods, Mr. Bellaman. I try to be rational and honest in dealing with myself, but when I am of dreams, a chance name or thought can send me into wild, imaginative trances. I lie down and close my eyes. I am not Tedd Burr. I am a beautiful woman, desired, loved, cherished. Shall I ever be loved? Loved by many in all shadings of love? Or could I but lie in one man's heart as tragically as he lie in mine? But what impossible sentiments. If only I could control myself, Mr. Bellaman. I know these dreams aren't practical, but you are. So it is a battle between you and my dreams. I swear there's a big me and a little me. The big me is wise, but weak. The little me is young and tantalizing. Oh, don't leave me now, Mr. Bellaman. Yes, I am dramatizing. I shall laugh in a moment. No, I don't want to laugh. Perhaps it is just the suspense of waiting to hear what you have to say about my novel. I said to you in the very beginning that I am not a physician, nor a psychiatrist, and I am not attempting to usurp their function. At first it seemed to me that you do not require either. Today I'm not so sure. I suspect that this is Sidney French, the protagonist in your novel. Yes, it is. I don't think Sidney French is who you believe him to be. Anyone this ill-adjusted to his environment makes everyone around him equally ill-adjusted. I exaggerated Sidney's worst qualities for dramatic effect. I didn't write about Sidney French because I like to write. I thought if the novel had any dramatic possibilities that I could play Sidney, and that might be the start of a unique acting career for me. Listen, Ted, I'm an old man, relatively speaking. I've lived a long time and I've seen a lot. I can only talk truth to you by hurting your feelings worse than any surgeon ever could. If you can take it, if you're strong enough, it may be good for you. If you think it is not the right comment for you, you are free to reject it and go your own way. Up front, I must tell you, I knew Jamie Wakefield personally. He was a good friend of mine, and he was quite talented, but he missed all boats. And the latter days of Jamie were not pretty. With all due respect, Mr. Bellaman, we're not talking about Jamie Wakefield now. We're talking about Sidney French. So then, let me talk about Sidney French. I will start with the obvious. There is no such world in which Sidney French could ever exist. Perhaps if there were a world with 3 sexes, Sidney might pass. But there can never be such a world. Why can't Sidney rightfully exist as a fictitious character in the world of a novel? Even in the world of fiction, Sidney would be considered an aberration. Your Dr. Gordon was an aberration in society, and yet he existed as a character in King's Row. Let's stick to your novel. I think your main problem is that you have not put down on paper what I imagine was in your mind. You said that the Frenches were in the top echelon of society, and yet you have presented the Frenches as nothing more than a lower middle-class family with the worst breeding and the most outrageous manners. I wrote about society as I see it here in Bellevue. Yes, it is merely a masking, and the people behind it are fairly low class. However much you may have drawn from real life, the book entirely lacks reality. Most of the characters are paper thin, and their talk is completely artificial. I can't imagine any really thoroughbred person putting on the pure snobbish talk of the Frenches. Fine people are never haughty. Only false pretenders are. Do you think people are genuinely nice? I think they can be fairly nasty. I caught the Frenches with their pants down. Maybe once upon a time they were a beautiful family, but they've had their day in the sun. Now behind Windy Hill sits a family coming ever nearer to its extinction and death. Also, I find the musical setup incomprehensible. You claim that Sidney was a talented and discriminating musician, and yet he was overly concerned with Debussy's Clair de Lune. Clair de Lune has only a slight poetry. It's not representative Debussy. It's not even good Debussy. I met Debussy once in Paris, and he dismissed Clair de Lune as a sugar plum, pas important. Why couldn't Sidney have played the pagodas or the magical preludes? Why are you picking apart Clair de Lune? I love that music, and it makes no difference to me whether Debussy cared for it or not. I do, and so do many, many other people. Most people don't know those other compositions you mentioned. So if I put Clair de Lune in my novel, and readers can hear it in their imagination because it is familiar to them, then that's enough for me. Then there are the colloquialisms which are completely out of place. Only in vaudeville would one speak of a great pianist as a talent. Sidney was not a great pianist. If only he had the goal to be a great pianist, what a brilliant career he might have had. Yet, when playing Claire de Lune, Sidney could dream still. Ted, the boy you portrayed is not just a fairy, and it's spelled F-A-I-R-Y, not F-A-E-R-Y. That's something else. He is also a fool. He demanded attention and approval from everyone, and he did everything to lose it. And the attention he did get, he hated. I know Sidney is a fool. I wrote him knowing it. I think Sidney is doomed, which is why I ended his life. The story of Sidney French is pure escapism. It is a retaliation against society, and it is dreadfully catty. In fact, this book has only one value. It's a pathological document. It is the frank exposition of a sick psyche. Even in the world of psychiatry, which is not surprised by anything, this boy is a sick boy. All of his actions, every one of them, are actions of hysteria. I think you may have done yourself a fine service in writing it. It is now out of your system. Why are you critiquing Sidney as if you were critiquing me as the author? I told you, I wrote Sidney as a means to an end, as a part I could play in a drama. You cannot wish to be like Sidney. You cannot sanely wish such a life or such an attitude. I'd rather see you shredded by German machine guns than grow into someone as freakish as Sidney French. I told you I only want to play Sidney as an actor. I must say, in all honesty, that this book has no chance of publication. From a literary point of view, it isn't any good. From a psychological point of view, it is a glimpse into the heart of an inferno. Isn't your opinion just one man's opinion? No. My opinion is not a personal one. It is a professional one, based on professional training and experience. It is a literary judgment. Just like I know bad piano playing when I hear it. Your biggest problem is that you tell far too much. Sex situations cannot be handled so roughly. This kind of writing has been confined to the bottom shelf of distasteful literature. Fine. That's all I want, is to make some money and to get a start. My book may not be good, but look at all of these. I think many of these are pretty awful. Why shouldn't I take a chance and submit it to a publisher? What I have been trying to say without hurting your feelings is that you do not write well. It is the very fabric of your writing that I think is immature and far from ready for any kind of publication. I recall only one sentence that stands out. Each day he swore there was no God. Each night he prayed. That's a fine sentence. It is strong and dramatic. I must conserve my strength because I'm still battling an illness from 2 years ago. I have a tricky heart that doesn't permit me stairs or even to pick up a suitcase. So when I am taking time out for this, I am doing it out of friendship. So please, do not fight back unnecessarily. I'm grateful that you make the time and effort for me, Ted. I've lived a certain amount of time. I know certain things. I would not tell you anything that isn't genuine. When I am in doubt, I say so. I am selfish, Mr. Bellaman. I don't want you so ill that you won't be able to help me. Your friendship is the most beautiful thing in my life. You gotta believe that. We are two fairly sensible people, aren't we? Don't you think the best friendship is a completely honest one? So please understand when I say that your opinion is only that of one man. I respect it tremendously. But perhaps somebody else should knock me down. I expect you to be hard-headed about a lot of things. It's all right. if it can be combined with a capacity for learning. If you have no further use of the novel, could you please send back the copy? At this moment, I feel that I must submit it to a publisher. If I didn't, there may always be the question, maybe what if? Would you like me to make some notes? Oh, yes! I would love to have your notes. Oh, I shall wait breathlessly for them. In due time, I am a busy man. I pray I don't lose you by this. You know, if you wish me to stick around and see what we may work out for you, you must not be resentful. I'm not resentful. No, not a bit. I'm just so thankful. I shall send along a grumpy photograph of me as a scolding present. Not quite. I don't scold. Oh, I sigh with contentment. Oh, Mr. Bellaman, you are a light. So, I've given you an overview of the last 23 years of my involvement with this story. You know, back in 2000, I had no idea this was all going to unfold. But what I do know is I gave Ted a gift back then of him seeing himself on a large screen and basically having a coming out story. His family came up to me and thanked me for revealing parts of him that they didn't know. And I have to also say, Ted gave me a gift. He gave me the gift of trusting me to tell his story and the gift of the letters and the permission so that I could have a long-term career project that I'm passionate about. I hope together, Ted and I can give a gift to humanity that will create more awareness and understanding of what it means to be transgendered.